Hello and welcome to New People, New Ways, a podcast in partnership with Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions United Methodist that explores new ways of being church through the stories and the insights of scholars and practitioners alike. I'm Piper Ramsey-Sumner, layperson and cultivator of Fresh Expressions for the Florida Conference.
And I'm Michael Adam Beck. I'm the director of Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions UM. And today we are joined by Amie Martin. Amie is in awe of Jesus and hopes to encourage his body, the church, to more faithfully reflect him in the world. She's an ordained elder in the Missouri Conference of the United Methodist Church and planting pastor of 8020 United Methodist Church in O'Fallon, Missouri.
Welcome, Amie.
Excited to have you.
Hi.
Hello. How's it going in Missouri?
It's cold today. Very, very, very cold.
Oh, yeah. See, I was excited here in Tallahassee that the high is 60. I was like, ooh, it's cold finally.
Oh, wow.
That's how it goes here.
Yeah.
That's like a cold day for us.
We're in the 30s, high in the 30s today.
Yeah. There might be like 1 or 2 days that we get that in Tallahassee, but mostly it'll be maybe 40s. Yeah. Who knows, Michael? What's the coldest that it gets there?
Yeah, today's like the coldest day we've had all year. It was like 70 yesterday and then 40 today, so it's weird. But that's why I keep trying to steal Amie to come down to the Florida Conference, but don't tell them you UMC folk about that.
I like beaches.
Yeah, there's lots of those here. Lots and lots of those. All right, Amie. Well, our first question I will ask you. Who is Amie Martin?
Well, you kind of got the least important question first. Amie was just a girl. Just a girl that decided to have faith in God and trust. So there's just really not a whole lot. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. And am trying my best to follow this interesting and mystical calling that we talk so much about in United Methodism, and lead people to know Christ.
Nice. So, Amie, tell us the story of 8020. What is the community's vision? How did it come about? What does it look like?
Yeah. Well, not a whole lot of people believe me when I tell them that in seminary, one of my most impactful classes was the budget practicum. And it's there that we dissected a budget of a large church. And then I did some research on my own because I was a little bit, really disturbed by the ratios and the categories of how much is spent where. And come to find out that research has been done. It doesn't matter the size or the denomination of the churches in the United States, but about 5 to 10% is actually spent on giving outside the walls of the church and restoring the community and alleviating poverty and kind of doing the stuff that God and that Jesus called us to do. And so that's when I think the kernel, the seed of the vision of 8020 Church was born. And it really was born over a lament of, wow, the church in the United States in general is spending a lot of money on a lot of things, and they're still dying. So what would it look like to kind of spend money like they did in the early church and in Acts, and kind of follow that model in this context? And so the vision of 8020 Church is within 10 years that 8020 Church will demonstrate its commitment to the way of Christ and the early church by sharing and giving 80% of its tithes and offerings to restoring the community and only 20% on overhead.
Wow. So I'm so excited that you found that disturbing. It's really disturbing to me too. And I think about like what Jesus did. Okay. So, he stands up in the synagogue in Nazareth and says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to proclaim the year of the captives, release of the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, and to, recover the oppressed and the sick." And then he goes about doing those things, right? And then a community forms around that activity,
right,
called the church. And then, structures and leadership things come into being. But it's like basically, if our budget is an indicator of our spiritual baseline in like American Christianity, or like what the condition of the heart of the church is, it's a pretty bad indicator that it's like we do everything else. Then maybe if we get around to the stuff that Jesus said it was his personal mission to come and do,
right,
then maybe we do that. So
right. Well, and in that too, he said it's got to be good news to the poor.
yes,
and we are one of the most developed Western countries that has the highest poverty rates, and the churches in the United States aren't a lot of times really good news to the poor at all. And I wouldn't say that budget is the indicator, but it is an indicator of our hearts. I mean, it's the same in our, we preach this to our people, right? Like how you steward your money is a reflection of your discipleship and of your heart. But then our church doesn't always really take that into consideration as well. So,
yeah.
So talk a little bit about where 80/20 meets, what the shared space looks like give people a window into what the church actually looks like.
Yeah, well, we knew that if we were ever going to get to 80/20 as a financial model and a vision, that we would need an alternate income. We don't just want to plant for a church for affluent people who can tithe a lot. So from the very beginning, we didn't want to rely, we didn't want the church to be sustained or rely upon tithes and income. That would be extra, and we could use that to serve the community, right? So the way that we have chosen to do that is we got a space that simultaneously, while we planted the church, we also planted or started a co-working business called 80/20 Studios that shares space. So during the work week, we're a co-working community, and there's coworkers out there now. And they have subscriptions like you would have to a gym to, come and use the space to work. We have Zoom rooms. We have a podcast studio. We have a conference room and other meeting rooms. And then there's also about 13 offices for rent. And so we're slowly, and I say we, the church doesn't run the studios. It's a separate tax entity. It's a separate organization, and there are employees of the studios that are not employees of the church. But we share space, and the two organizations were birthed together to have a symbiotic relationship.
That's so cool. I love that idea too of using that space, because we talk about that all the time, how our churches might sit there maybe 6 days a week being almost completely empty, but there's so much potential, and some churches are lucky enough to be able to use it in all these different ways. But I love the idea that the church can do that, and it also creates that bit of that financial stability so that you can concentrate more on reaching and taking care of people and doing that important work that you're really committed to, of the poverty alleviation.
Yeah, that's the goal. And I used to listen, when I was in seminary and stuff, I'd hear pastors complain about, I never get out in the community. I'm just surrounded by the four walls of my office is in the church, and I'm around church staff. And I thought, ooh, I don't want to do that. I've been a part of church staff a lot, and this is my first lead pastor thing. But the cool thing is I got friends here in the community that are coworkers here. And so it's really, really fun to, I don't have to do some I'm going to go out to a coffee thing and sit there and hope people talk to me because I'm going to say I'm a pastor in the community because we bring community here too during the week. So that's fun.
That's really cool. I love that. So what does it look like when you actually do gather? I know that you gather 80-20 gathers around a shared meal. And so it's like the dinner church idea. So tell me a little bit about that. And why do you think that model of dinner church tends to work so well and in so many different contexts?
Oh, yeah. It is. It's an unusual worship experience. And it's very, very relaxed and casual, and it feels like you're going to a dinner party or a catered event or something like that. And when people arrive, they're just talking and they're milling around, and there's ping pong and air hockey and the recreation part of the co-working space. So kids are playing, and we have 2 dogs. Because
resident dogs,
they are service animals for some of our friends, but yeah, it's a gathered community, and I'm just so excited. I've always wanted church to feel less like a show and more of like a community, and it is that, and we pray together, we eat together, we do sing together. I was pretty set on no singing at dinner church because people in the world don't just sing like a choir, but my people are singing in people, and they like to sing. And so we sing loud, and we are pretty unrehearsed, and we are multi-age. And so we do that. We have a Jesus story and discussion time, and we do share a kind of like a liturgical communion part too. It's pretty weird. It morphed into its own thing. And so yeah. Oh, and dinner church. Why dinner church?
Yeah,
everybody's got to eat.
Mm-hmm.
It's an equalizer, and we are very socioeconomically diverse. We have unsheltered friends that are very important parts of our faith community, and we have college presidents, and so we're very socioeconomically diverse.
Yeah, I love how bringing this back to Jesus again, how it looks a lot like his table, right, where he basically started the church around tables, and he was always throwing dinner parties, and people were, the religious leadership were all bent out of shape because he was not following the proper protocol, not doing the ritual cleansings and all those things. And but at his table, right, he had this diversity of the poorest of the poor and wealthy supporters who were providing out of their own means, all gathered around that table. And yeah, so when you have your dinner church, what you said you do some singing, is there like a sermon of some kind, a Jesus story, dialogue? Like, how do you do that aspect of it?
Yes, there's a Jesus story, and that's just kind of like, I don't know, what you'd call maybe like workshop style preaching, like where we ask questions and let everybody kind of preach a little bit, where they come up with really, really good insights, and so that's helpful. And then there are table discussions. Sometimes it's just it's an adventure, so you don't know what to expect all the time. We play lots of games too, lots of group games, multi-generational, stuff, and we don't take ourselves too seriously. So it's,
Yeah. See, I love that. It makes me think of, that's like the last couple episodes that we've done, the interviews we've had, a lot of what it kind of all comes down to is those relationships. Tiffany was talking about how sitting down people from different generations and from different ethnicities created an incredible community of healing for her church, and kind of prepared them as well to start stretching themselves to do more of these fresh expressions.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, we talked with Brett last week, and all what he was kind of talking about in terms of what he does with bringing churches that are kind of in decline into a new space is through fresh expressions and these kind of things. And it's all rooted in, who are we to the community? How do we connect to those people around us and to each other? And so they do dinner church and they do messy church and these things that you can't help but connect with a person because you're sitting next to them, eating a meal, being asked to discuss these things, which doesn't happen on a typical Sunday morning at church. You sit in the pews and you face one direction and you listen to one voice at a time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and Amie, so like you are kind of a blended ecology, but I think what's different than a lot of our guests that we have on, you don't have a traditional worship service. Like you don't have a normal, I say normal, but like the common church service and structure and all of that. Like your dinner church, your whole church is a fresh expression, essentially.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we kind of jumped in the deep end of like, hey, embrace something new, because, I like to think that, that the apostles might walk into some of our inherited church services and go, wait, this is church? They're just not used to a theater show with a platform like that when they were used to dinner church. And so for us to walk into a dinner church and go in a community-based kind of church and say, this is church, is a little bit like, let's embrace this and let's learn to, and again, we've done our own thing, included things we didn't otherwise think we would include and that kind of thing. But yeah, when you talked, Piper, about like who we are to the community and the goal, I mean, the 80-20 and even the dinner church to a certain extent are really just vehicles to help remind us of what we're all about. But going out and restoring the community is our mission, to restore the community by living and loving like Jesus everywhere we go. And so the exciting stuff is looking back over the last several months that we've been in existence and seeing how God has been doing that. Like when you prioritize something and you commit to something, you see how God is actually moving and doing all the stuff. So really cool.
So could you give some examples of how your church is doing that and what that looks like when God is doing that?
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things, there's so many. And these are birthed from like my people too, which I love. A couple of our people wanted to do a monthly laundry party, right? And so they play music on the Bluetooth speaker, and they have coffee and donuts because we just we like to have fun. And everyone that comes in, we give them this baggie of quarters and this little card in there that for if you need assistance, if you're having a hard time, it's our church information. And then they have like a raffle drawing of like a basket every time. So that's how we get their information too, anyway. But we have developed, that has turned into a valuable, its own little separate community. There are people who show up for laundry parties just because to hang out. And I mean, we've done all kinds of, someone, you hang out long enough and people begin asking for prayer about things and telling you the struggles of their lives. And I mean, I give people the option. We could do the light version or full on prayer with like anointing and everything. And they said full on, I need it all. And so, we were anointing with oil and praying in the middle of the laundry. So we've done those once a month all year long. And that's been so, so rewarding and so fun. We did camp instead of VBS because we know that affordable childcare is a huge issue in our county. And and a lot of the people that we are friends with and work with, summers are so hard. And, sometimes, you quit, you lose your job over the summer and you get another job. I mean, it's so hard. So we did a full week of camp, and I think 16 out of the 21 kids who registered for camp were not our church kids, which was really bizarre. I thought, how come? I guess they were just doing other camps or something. But that was a beautiful way to serve the community because they got to go for $25 for the week to a full day camp. And some of those families come to dinner church and have become good friends. And we do Unstuck Ministries, which is basically our social work ministry of the church. We train our people to build relationships, to hear the stories, to listen to the most pressing needs, to ask them what, their goals are and what they could use to get unstuck. It's, and all that. And so, I mean, there's been 15 families, I think we've served through that with, utilities, turning the water back on, the electricity back on. Food, housing, transportation. One of our members wanted to do, I'm sorry, I could go on and on, a gentle lending. Our treasurer actually had an idea, these payday loan places are preying on our people, and it's so unjust. And, sometimes they have jobs they can make it by, but then, like their car goes out, and it's just like to send them into a downward spiral. What if we did a gentle lending, 0% interest? They set the terms in their repayment, and it pays back into the gentle lending fund. So they know that when they pay back, that same money is recycled then for the next person. We've done 3 gentle lending agreements, and every single one of them pays back. And it's just every time they pay every month, I get tears in my eyes because they know they want that money to be there for someone else. It's been 2 cars and 1 oral surgery for a child that their parents weren't able to afford. So, I mean, so that's been really fun. There community meals each week, feed people. And it's just there. I could go on. There's a lot, but to see my people like really catch the vision that this is why we exist. We don't exist to entertain ourselves. We don't exist to try and feel holy, and we don't exist to try and impress one another. We like really exist to bring about shalom and restore the community and partner with God and God's mission for the world, and watch that they do is really, it's been rewarding to be their pastor. So
that's so awesome. And I love as well, because I think sometimes we get this idea that we're going to start this thing and it's going to change everything. We're going to have, we're going to fix every problem that exists in the world, and then of course you get burnt out immediately because that's impossible. But it feels like you and your church, you're saying, okay, what can we do? And like you said, not take ourselves too seriously. We can do what we can do. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, we'll move on and try something new. I don't know. I just love that so much, because I don't think that everything has to be done in these huge, big chunks, these big bites. It can be slow. It can be something that evolves over time, and that it doesn't have to be this big epic, I guess, kind of world changing. I think if there were communities like 80/20 all over everywhere, then that would be that huge change, because we would be doing what we can in our communities, in those smaller spaces,
That would be amazing. We are very, very locally oriented. We don't do a whole lot of like global mission things. Nothing actually. And things start and stop, Piper, like to not beat ourselves up. Like, you do what's in front of you. Like God puts lots in front of you. The more you just start to, John Wesley said, one of the reasons why we don't have compassion for the poor is we never visit them. We don't spend time with them. Right. And so like get people of various socioeconomic groups together, things happen. Sometimes it's a little messy, and sometimes people need, subculture training and context training, right? But love binds everything together, right? But God does stuff, and things happen. And when we were visiting one of our people in a recovery center one time, they were telling so many people about 80-20 that her social worker caught on and wanted to talk with me and asked if we wanted to come do a service there. So for several months, every Friday, which I loved, the recovery service that we did in the inpatient unit, so powerful every single time. But then that was a season because they actually stopped. They had some leadership transition, and then they stopped being a chemical dependency. They closed their chemical dependency unit. So I didn't realize that was why, we stopped, being invited back and going. But then I found out, they were just totally shifting gear. But that was one of my most exciting things in ministry. And then it ended. And so then it's like, okay, what's next? We made relationships there. And, there were some really sacred moments we spent, and we thank God and give God thanks and praise for those. And what are you bringing to us next, God? So.
That's great.
I love that orientation, Amie, because I think a lot of churches, they do the opposite, and we get in a committee meeting, we try to, strategize about what our community needs, and then we figure out, what we think that is, and then we go try to offer it. What you're doing is starting with, what is God doing in the lives of the people that are right in front of us in this neighborhood, in this community, and how do we join into that? And we'll figure it out as we go along.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have a committee meeting later to try to analyze what we've been doing, but you're actually starting with that.
Yeah. And you have to make friends. You have to. If you just start, for example, with a small group of upper middle class people, you're never going to do anything, because you have to make friends with a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of people with different abilities, and a lot of people in different, like you were talking about. I love how 80-20 is diverse in that way too. We have different abilities. We have different races. It's not all white. I think we're at about 25% of non-white, which I hope it grows. But you have to make friends to find those, where God is leading you. Friendship and play is one of our core practices.
Yeah, that's great. So I wonder if you maybe you can tell me, because it seems like part of your role as a pastor is to kind of see where people have that energy and the passion, and to kind of uplift it. Your laundry one was a great example. You didn't come up with that. Somebody else came up with that and brought it to you, and then you just kind of helped kind of facilitate and make it happen. So is that what it's like for you with leadership in this kind of role?
When I'm doing it at its best.
Yeah.
I gotta admit, sometimes people have ideas, even that laundry idea. Don't tell anyone. I guess I'll have to preempt this. But when I first heard that, I'm like, come on, can we please be more creative? Can we please do something more relational than being the church that comes in and is laundry bit, I really poo-pooed it in my mind, in my attitude. But they were really excited about it. And it has become one of my favorite times of ministry of the month, right? It's fun. And we have made so many friends. And we didn't set out to grow the dinner church on Sunday nights through the laundry, but it turns out that many of our, friends and friends of friends came from laundry days, So I sometimes God has to give me a little, ego check too. And you don't have all the good ideas. Let this happen. And when I do it well, then yes.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's a good marker of a church that will succeed, and that a pastor that is also succeeding is the ability to say, to not be the one who gets to choose, like, no, I don't like that. I don't think, like letting people have that power and empowering people to make stuff like that happen, in your community. Because I think the pastor's role is to just kind of facilitate and to move things and to be the support, that can be there and provide what they can with your theological education. But like you were saying also with how you do dinner church, a lot of it is where everyone's learning from each other.
Yeah.
And whoever's presenting is just kind of sparking the conversation, but then the real learning is happening in those conversations when people respond.
Yeah, they have really good moments. And it's also a feeling of equality. Is that the right word? I get those two words mixed up. Anyway, yeah, like that anyone can share, and God's Spirit can fill their mouth with something really, really helpful for everyone else. And it brings humility too to some of the like know-it-all people, myself included, right? When they see like, wow, that person has spiritual insights that are really, really helpful to even me, like it's somebody that maybe was different than them or thinks different than them. We have a very, very, we love to just live and let live, think and let think. You don't have to have some sort of political or social view to be a part of this community. We say, take what helps you become a more faithful follower of Jesus and leave the rest.
That's good. I like that.
So I'm curious, like, what does your conference do with you? So you're a United Methodist. We have these annual reports that we do, vitality metrics, which I think some of 80/20 would show up in those in positive ways, but most of what you do does not show up on like our institutional reporting in any way. So like, how do you measure your impact? Like what does vitality look like for your unique way of being church?
We're having those kind of discussions on our leadership team, but to your first question, I don't think the conference really knows what to do with us. But they've been really supportive. So that's the Missouri Conference is so supportive for church plants. And not just financially, but also like trusting, like you're doing something new and we want you to experiment. So we're going to support this and we're going to support you as a pastor. So that's one thing that they do is they support and encourage really, really well. I feel really supported by the conference. But as far as like, we're still trying to navigate that. Like, for example, my vision for my own role is that I become more and more bivocational or whatever, co-vocational, because it's not, one or the other. But I'm still working on my conference with that. I have a meeting this week trying to do some more work on that end. So, because the markers of success usually are, a church can support a full-time elder and a huge staff, and that makes them vital, in their community. But ours is completely the opposite. Like our vitality is the measure of success is our community impact, which is a tricky thing to like quantitatively measure. I don't really care about it quantitatively measuring it, but people like numbers, so I'll try and we've helped 15 families this year. We've whatever. But I think that is what it is just, if you can tell me how we can measure it so that conference people and people who aren't a part of the community will understand, I would love that, because I really don't know how to communicate that.
We're still working on that too, I feel like, trying to figure out. Because it is hard. It's hard to when there's been a certain way of kind of tracking these things, these metrics. The word too. I'm like, ooh, metrics,
right,
but
right.
That's just something, kind of it's expected to be there. So yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, and I don't have to fill out conference forms until we're chartered. So
there you go.
I have benchmarks meetings, and I have all those I have to fill out. They want to know our giving and our attendance and all that.
Yeah, I was actually just in a conversation about this, and the people in the conversation were basically measuring vitality with, does the church have a full-time pastor? How much money, those things. And then I asked this troublesome question, like, what if a church having a full-time pastor is not actually an indication of health at all? Because it's an indication that the people of the church don't own the ministry sometimes, and that it's the pastor doing everything for them, like a personal spiritual butler, rather than an equipper and an empowerer of the people. So and what you're doing with your space also, is not, some people, it's beyond some folks' paradigm to understand that probably what you're doing is probably the church, what most churches need to look like in most communities in the 21st century. That this idea of, hey, we'll own our own building and we'll mostly just worship in it or have Bible studies. Full-time pastors will facilitate all that. Those days really are passing.
That Band-Aid is really hard to rip off for people, though. I have found, my moments of discouragement, and they're often, come in just this very, very slow discipleship toward, this whole concept of, let's be the church instead of market the church, instead of, let's just be who we're called to be, like the church, the early church and the church described in Acts chapter 2. And then just trust God with all the rest of it. Right. But the way that, church has been done for so many centuries now is a really hard Band-Aid to rip off. And we are a little bit of a protest church. I was thinking about, there's that element, and we don't want to poo-poo everybody else, because God's doing amazing things. But there's that tiny little spirit of, like, we're protesting and we're returning to a different way of being and doing church. And there's a little bit of, like, and we're kind of proud of it. Come find out what it's all about, but I have that protest nature in me. So I can't get over it.
Yeah, that's good though. You have to have those, show the different ways that church can be, and what, have people start asking, well, what if, and how could I change the way that I act, how I exist in the community, being a verb, how can I be the church? I think it's so vital, such a question that needs to be asked and contemplated by all of us,
Yeah. And there are lots of people who have that special, like, they look at things and they point to it and they say, but why? Why are we doing it like that? Is that helpful or is that harmful? Why? Why do we have a theater staged church? Why do we focus our finances on our staff and our buildings? Why? And, I asked a question that got me really thinking, and with what's happening in the United Methodist Church and human sexuality, one of my big why questions for a long time has been, why is the church the de facto, like, heavy-handed officiant for wedding ceremonies? Why? Is that necessary? Why does the pastor of a church get this, like, authority to say who gets to get married, who doesn't get to get married? Are they some kind of, expert in this area, love expert or something, like, why? And so I began asking a lot of those questions, and it led me into a lot of research that I just kind of consumed over the course of a couple of years. from Scripture and studying Christian tradition since the early church all the way up until now. And I found that was actually really surprised to find that this idea of the church kind of being in this wedding business and being a heavy hand in this, it's not really anything that came from the Bible. There's no precedent, nothing at all in the Bible that talks about clergy people officiating or solemnizing wedding ceremonies. And it's not in the first half of Christian tradition as a general rule either. It was very, very different in the ancient world. And so I thought, gosh, it doesn't make sense to do what we're doing. It's clearly ripping apart, whole denominations, and people get nasty arguments about it. So like, why do we do that? And so anyway, I wrote a book that Michael was so kind as to write the forward for, but it's How Holy is Matrimony? Rethinking the Church's Role in the Wedding Business. And I share all of that really eye-opening research that I found about kind of getting out of the wedding business and getting back into all the missional things we're called to do. So
yeah. Ooh. And that's so, like, it does make me think, how are we ready for that conversation? Because that is a big one. It's something you're just like, oh yeah, of course the church does this, of course you have to had a ordained minister in almost every state, to perform your wedding, and we just think it's just like totally normal, but and
say them
that it's just, there's a lot to it, isn't there? And it is very much a business, people may have their whole career kind of around that. That's such an interesting thing to think through. So what is the book called?
It's called How Holy is Matrimony? Rethinking the Church's Role in the Wedding Business.
Yes.
It's
a good one.
Yeah.
It is a good one.
You can get it at pastoramie.com.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
I'll put that in the show notes so people can find it.
Or on Amazon and all that stuff too. But.
Yeah. So Amie, as you, I feel like you've described a lot of the opportunities and the advantages of being church in this way. For our listeners who are our inherited church pastors and laity, and we have buildings we got to deal with and all these different committee structures and such. For one, what are some of your greatest challenges with being church in this way? And then what suggestions would you make to those of us that are still operating in a more of an inherited kind of paradigm? How could our churches look more like what you're doing?
Biggest challenges so far, and there's always a double side to challenges and blessings, but it is very, very heavy volunteer run. So we're constantly asking ourselves, how can we do this easier? How can we do this simpler? How can we do this without burdening, volunteers? And it's working. I mean, we do muddle through, but that is a challenge. But it's also a blessing because there's so much ownership and there's so much investment with folks, so much more than a typical passive, sit in the pew and lead churchgoer. But another challenge is the diversity is a challenge. I'm not going to lie and say that it's not, because you do have a collision of worlds. You have a collision of thought worlds, and so to learn to live in love, to restore the community by living and loving like Jesus everywhere we go. We talk about how learning to love one another well is our greatest task here while we're here. You don't have to agree. You don't have to understand. You don't have to like what other people think or what they say. But to be curious and to learn to love and respect one another is it's a big task. It's really simple, but it's not easy. It's a simple idea, but it's not easy
Yeah.
to carry out. So there are challenges in that way. And those can be painful sometimes. And then you have to go back and do kingdom work and show people how the gospel works in real life and in conflict. So those are kind of the challenges. Now, I don't know advice. So I know a lot of Fresh Expressions people, like you said, Michael, they start with an inherited church that mothers a fresh expression. And so we didn't do that unless you consider the conference as our mother. To take an inherited church, I think you start with changing slowly, trying to cast vision and change to the way people think, right? About the why of the church. Drill down to your why. And if your why really is to let people feel comfortable for an hour and feel good about themselves, name that, but if your why is greater than that or different than that, find that and you have to start changing the way people think. Because even if you start changing ministries and models, but you haven't really converted the people in their minds to like, I'm serving Jesus in this way, it's not going to last long. So
yeah, I think a lot about that. That's what I do a lot when I talk about Fresh Expressions with people, is the why. And that's the most important thing. A lot of people are like, oh, I want my church to do this or that, or we want to have more kids in the church or whatever it is. Right, it's like, we need to get back down to the why of it. We need to figure out what's really your motivation, and is your why something that you want, or is it something that reflects what your values are and what the values of Christianity and what Jesus taught? Does it align with that? And so that can bring about, understandably, a lot of discomfort, and it can be a very difficult process for people. And so that's, I think about, there's a lot of people that try that in churches that aren't ready, and communities that aren't ready, and that can be a painful process, and so people have to be ready for it, at least on some level as well, to begin that.
So Amie, when you think about the future of the church, what do you see 10, 20 years from now, and what is your hope for the church?
I truly believe that the church of the future, and I can only speak in my context, so like in the United States, is going to have to pare down and make difficult decisions or close. And so, I think the funding that a lot of churches have enjoyed and have been grown so accustomed to, it's already dwindling with the way that, younger generations tend to tithe less. But it's also the economic times that we're in. And if you want to be a church for all people, you're going to need, to serve financially hurting folks as well, and can't rely on that. And I just think that if the church is going to survive and look anything like the Jesus movement, churches are going to have to rethink their budget priorities and how to do church simpler, how to do church with less staff, more volunteer-led. And so, we talked about like ripping off a Band-Aid. I'm trying to do that because I truly believe that the only viable church of the future is going to be that. And so we're like practicing ahead of time, and hopefully trying to get that imagination going ahead of time, so that these folks can spread that and do that more and more.
That's good.
I like that. practicing for a future that's on its way, whether we want it to be or not. Yeah.
There's some Advent theme in there, right?
Yeah. We're on an adventure of waiting and preparing for the future, because it's going to be, I think, really, really catastrophic and unsettling for it already is. I mean, we're not talking about some like asteroid hitting. This has been a slow for the church in the United States. And so as people like lose their funding and lose their, and all that, we've got to be just focusing on doing what Jesus taught us to do and trusting God with the rest. And realizing our pastors might not have really huge salaries from the church anymore. And then getting into ministry tough too for other reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds tough for lots of reasons. Yeah. Well, where can our listeners find you online? Your website, and then 80/20. Where can they learn more about that?
I'll put it in. It's the number 80 and the word 20, 8020church.org. And we are on Facebook. We're on, we have a YouTube channel. I like to do video podcasting, and so we do that. We also have we don't have a online like worship community that joins in, like pipes in with us while we're there, but we do put the sermon as a podcast. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Very cool.
Yeah, Pastor Amie, More of Jesus.
Awesome. Cool. I'll put that in the link in the description so people can find you and connect with you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yay. This is fun. You always get me fired up every time I get to hear you talk about this stuff, because it aligns so much with all these things that I'm passionate about, and it just makes so much sense to me. So it's awesome what you're up to.
Amen. Thank you.
And to those listening, thank you for joining us for this episode of New People, New Ways. If you enjoyed our conversation with Amie, please share it with a friend, give it a rate, review, subscribe, all that stuff. And to connect with us and learn more about Fresh Expressions, you can check out freshexpressionsfl.org. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. See you next time on New People, New Ways.